Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the head of product advanced programs at Uber, Nikhil Goyal.
Welcome, everybody, to the world's first Uber Elevate Summit. My name is Nikhil Goyal. I'm Uber's head of a product for advanced programs and Uber Elevate, and I'll be your MC for the day. On behalf of the entire Uber Elevate team, I'm so excited to welcome all of you to Dallas for what will undoubtedly be an announcement and information-packed 3 days. We'll be ending today with a happy hour and dinner around 8:30, so I hope you'll join us for that as well. For those at home, this summit is being live streamed publicly, so for all of you here, please feel free to post online and in social media as well. We'll also be ending many of the panel sessions with question and answers via live mic here, as well as online on Slido.com for all of you here and back at home. So without further ado, I'd love to start off the day and have all of you join me in welcoming our Chief Product Officer, Jeff Holden.
Hey guys, we talked about developing a special Elevate fist bump, but we haven't figured it out yet. So it's just a regular handshake. All right, guys. Wow, this is an amazing turnout. We were like, I wonder if what happens if nobody shows up? I guess, it'd be like a dry run over again. But lines out the door. That's why we started late today. That's an exciting reason. So welcome everybody to the Uber Elevate Summit. We hope to make this an annual affair, so we can actually keep kind of a drumbeat on all of the developments that go on in this ecosystem. This event for us represents, concrete steps forward in realizing the vision. You guys probably all have the same, sort of desire or, passion, which is to, get up in the morning, go to work on a 6-minute flight, or, for me, go to Napa on a 15-minute flight, versus hours sitting in a car and wasting time. And the great thing is, just like artificial intelligence, flying cars have been promised for decades, but are actually arriving now. So we actually get to live in this era of flying cars. I actually hate that term, by the way, but we'll have to live with it. Unfortunately, the media loves it. So we have a lot of work to do, though. This isn't going to be easy. We have the Elevate white paper, which articulates our thought process. We started writing that paper specifically because we were like, why not urban aviation? Why can't we do this? And we just documented our thought process. And as we did that, it turned into a project. It turned into a product, and we're really excited to talk about that. But what I want to do today actually is start not by talking about aviation, but by talking about ride sharing and urban mobility, because I think that provides a really interesting backdrop or contextual backdrop for why we're doing this and why urban aviation is so exciting and solves a lot of problems. Ride-sharing has really become about using private cars for public good. And we didn't understand that when we started, as I'll explain in a few minutes. But we've learned that urban mobility has some big problems. Cities generally have big problems and have an opportunity to be unlocked. There's congestion, there's pollution, there's parking, which takes up a massive amount of land. And so I want to talk about this for a bit, and then we'll segue into the air. Not literally. OK. So it's really easy to demonize the car. We have, you can see a massive container ship here carrying vehicles. It's a pretty good example of what happens every day. There are 1 billion of these cars on the road today. And that number is trending to 2 billion by 2050. Of course, we don't believe that trend line will ever happen because we have a different view. But the number of cars on the road today is more than the population of the US and Europe combined. And it's not really about the cars themselves, it's about how we use those cars. And we use them individually. And that's where we run into problems. So next time you're at a red light, stop and take, well, you should definitely stop. Take a look around at the cars next to you, and don't stare too long because people think you're kind of weird. But look around and see how many people are in those vehicles. And what you're going to see, at least if you look now, maybe the next few years, you'll see only Ubers full of people. But you're going to see that most of the time it's just the driver behind the wheel. Individual car use, unfortunately, comes with a large cost. And one of those costs is the lost time, people spending a lot of time sitting in traffic, sitting behind the wheel. A couple of good stats to show that are in Los Angeles and Sydney, people spend 2 weeks a year sitting in traffic. I mean, it's 2 whole weeks of their life lost that they're not spending with family, they're not spending at work, they're just sitting in a car doing nothing. In Mexico City, it's much worse, it's 5 weeks a year. And that's sort of part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that all of this congestion leads to a ton of pollution. There's 22% of the pollution that's created on the planet is from cars, from motor vehicles. It's actually much worse in the United States. It's about a third, and it's number 1 in the United States in terms of the contributions to pollution. But that's only 5% of the problem, because those cars are just sitting around 95% of the time. They're only 5% utilized. And that means that we have to store them somewhere. And the places we store them are parking lots, parking garages, parking spots all over the place. There are 8 parking spots in the United States for every car that's owned. And that takes up about a fifth of the land mass of some cities. So you think about what we could do if we could just eliminate parking and get that land mass back and start using it for affordable housing, bike lanes, et cetera. But in most cities, unfortunately, parking is encouraged. We're still living in the world of the past, and there are actually zoning regulations that say you have to have a minimum number of parking spots for a home, for a residential complex, for an office building. That's the insanity of the way we design cities today. And people are pushed to car ownership by urban design. So even in New York City, you think, okay, the subway system is amazing in New York City. The problem is it doesn't get to everyone's door. And it actually serves the outer boroughs less well than Manhattan. And so what happens is 2.7 million cars come into Manhattan every single day. That's a staggering number. And that's just the haphazard nature of our current transportation system. And the problem is this gets worse in lower income neighborhoods. So neighborhoods where the neighborhoods are workplaces where the folks are living or working not close to public transit. And that often is what happens, is that you get far away from public transit, and that drives the cost of housing down. The Brookings Institution actually found that 30% of jobs in the United States is probably one of the best cases, are 90 minutes away by public transit. That's kind of a shocking statistic, spending 90 minutes each direction to get to work. That's obviously a big disadvantage. And so families in that situation are basically required to buy a car. They have no choice. And with all the costs that entails, of course they're going to drive the car, and they're going to use the car much more often than they otherwise would. The funny thing is, Uber's founders weren't thinking about any of this. And by the way, the app didn't look this cool back then either. But had to show the cool thing. They were just focusing on just push a button and get a ride. And it was there was a cold night in Paris. It was a typical terrible situation trying to get a taxi. And they were like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just push a button and get a ride? And the thing is, as this thing began to scale, it became clear. It sort of really shined a bright light on all of the problems with urban mobility. And we found that the status quo is insufficient, it's inefficient, and it's unequal. And it gave us something very, very serious to go off and tackle. It's a very compelling mission to try to fix that problem. The good news is there's an alternative, which is a combination of sharing rides and taking public transit. And we can get there by providing really affordable rides and reliable alternatives to car ownership. Basically, the equation is we have to have ubiquity and low cost. If we can provide ubiquity and low cost, people will actually dispense with their privately owned vehicles. We're finding that to be true. So let's talk about reliability. This is LA, and you can see as this thing's ticking, it's adding a year of development, and you can see kind of where our network has expanded and where we're doing pickups and drop-offs. So we're serving greater and greater reach into the city as kind of Uber develops. And this is exciting. This is a 100 square mile city, and the average ride is less than 10 minutes away. If you're in the core, it's much less than that. This is Paris. It's a same situation, but a very different layout, a very different geographical kind of city. And what makes this possible is the technology that we've developed. So this is not as necessarily easy as just writing. It's definitely not as easy as writing a smartphone app and deploying it. You have a lot of trickiness in the back end. There's a lot of network optimization. And one of the things that we have to do is dynamic pricing, which has been an interesting debated topic over the years, although not so much anymore. I think people have learned that it's actually critical. But Dynamic pricing allows us to match the most rides, basically consummate the most trips. And the reason it lets that happen is because when the demand is outstripping supply, we can, the number of cars on the road, we can raise price. And when we raise price, the amount that a driver makes by taking a trip goes up. It's a very simple concept, but what that means is people who otherwise wouldn't drive are now incentivized to come onto the network and drive. And that means we serve more trips, and that just means a more reliable service. As I mentioned before, ubiquity and low cost are the two drivers. So this is trading those things off, but you're always getting a trip. And it gives us an opportunity to optimize the network and start to forecast those situations and try to figure out how to position cars so that we lower the instances of high prices. So even when it's raining, even after a football match or late at night, you're going to be able to get a ride. One of the really interesting sort of developments or learnings we've had is that Uber's busiest hours are, you can think of as our rush hour, is at night after the bars close. I guess this is not actually rendering. Let's see. I'm going to try to get it to render. Okay, it's not rendering. I don't know what's going on. You can't see it here. So unless you guys can see it, nope. This would be showing you a graph showing that we have a peak that goes on around midnight when bars start, actually after midnight, when bars start to close. And this is when a few things are true. One, people are drunk. They shouldn't be driving anyway. And so a lot of people have learned that, I bet you many of you would raise your hand if I asked you the question, how many take Ubers when you think you're going to be having a few drinks? I won't do that because it'll be very loud when you all raise your hands. Maybe I'll take off. The situation is that people have started to actually shift from driving their own private cars to riding Ubers for that use case. So that's driven our demand in that direction. But also we're seeing that public transit and taxi are less available during those times, and Uber is much more available. So that combination of effects yields a curve that basically shifts to the right, which is a very powerful sort of like added value for cities. And the way that's manifested in just a couple of examples, in California, we saw alcohol-related deaths fall by 5% when Uber launched in cities there. And in Seattle, we saw DUI arrests drop by 10% when we launched there. And that's pretty exciting. Those are big needle movers. That doesn't happen every day. And so we think there's some real power to this model from that perspective. So wherever you are, wherever you're going, you can get there. And one of the beauties of our model is that there's no destination discrimination. I don't know if you guys know this, but we don't actually reveal to drivers what your destination is until you're in the car and they start the trip. And so that way, there's no cherry picking. I used to live in New York, and I remember when I wanted to go to the airport during rush hour, I knew that taxi drivers didn't want to take me to the airport because they wanted to do a whole bunch of short trips and kind of like capitalize on Manhattan traffic, on Manhattan busyness. And so I would hide my bag in the bushes and hail a taxi, and then when the taxi pulled up, I'd open the door, run to the bushes, grab my bag, and whip it in the car, and jump in, and then the guy would have to like physically kick me out if he didn't want to take me to the airport. They usually won't go that far, but sometimes they do. So, as I have experience with. So this is London, and in 2012, our coverage here was limited to downtown London, the Soho area. And as you can see, coverage expanded dramatically outward into the suburbs to cover the unserved areas. And that's true elsewhere, too. This pattern of kind of no discrimination in pickups is proving out in many places. In New York, taxis have only 8% of their pickups outside of Manhattan. We have 40%. In fact, 33% of our trips both start and end in the outer boroughs outside of Manhattan. So it's non-discriminatory because you push a button and a car shows up. There's no kind of like, hey, there's no ride hailing from the curb, and so nobody's judging you as they pull up to actually decide whether to pick you up or not. The other thing that's really exciting about ride sharing is that it's complementary to our mass transit system, our public transit system. So oftentimes people use Uber they'll use subway or the bus to get kind of the sort of large part of their trip done. Use Uber for the last mile. And so here's London again, and we find that these green dots are here at train stations. We find that 30% of rides in the outer boroughs in morning rush hour start or end within 200 meters of a tube or train station. And recently, London developed the underground night tube and launched that, so people could get home safely at night into the outer boroughs. And what we found was almost immediately there was a decline of pickups in many of the central London tube stops, and an increase in pickups at stations in the outer boroughs. And so the implication of that is that Londoners are taking the night tube to get out of central London and Uber to get the last mile or two home. So we're really excited that we don't see Uber as like an alternative to mass transit. We see them as very complementary, and together they end up solving kind of a lot of the problems of urban mobility. So back to Paris. This is pretty cool. As we've expanded out into these into the sort of far reaches of Paris, these areas that are in that kind of marked in green are underprivileged zones. They've been determined by the French government to be in need of special assistance, and we're serving those areas very, very well. And there's a Harvard study that we recently saw that says that access to reliable transportation, not the crime rate or your school test scores, for example, which is really shocking to me, are the #1 predictive factor for whether someone can escape poverty. So how long it takes you to actually get to work or how long it takes you to get to school. That's a pretty amazing statistic. And so cracking the code on this means cracking the code on that. And we've also, speaking about mass transit and ride-sharing working together, we've developed these sort of like synergies between mass transit, between city governments and Uber. Many of those are purely organic, as I just talked about, but some of them we're actually formalizing an agreement. So in New Jersey, this is in Summit, New Jersey, there was a whole kind of like, there was a bill that was pending to build a new rail station and, or to build a new parking garage at a rail station. And people were against it because it was going to be this kind of ugly thing and it was going to take up a bunch of space. And what happened instead is Summit decided to do a partnership with Uber. So we signed a deal with them so that we'll provide trips back and forth. And they subsidize these trips back and forth to the train station. And that eliminated the need to build this thing and have taxpayer dollars go into building a parking garage. And in Boston, we're doing a pilot to improve both the quality and the cost of paratransit service for elderly people and people with disabilities. So this is beginning to become something that actually the cities are leaning into and engaging with because they see this interesting synergy. So that's reliability and sort of coverage, but what about affordability? So I mentioned ubiquity and low cost, right? This is the formula. Affordability comes from a few different things. So one of those is just getting to scale. So as you get the network operating at scale, a bunch of interesting things happen. You have a lot more cars on the network, which means there's cars nearby you at any given time, but it also means you utilize those cars much more efficiently. So you can start to actually lower prices, and the drivers will actually make the same money or more because of the trip volume. The fact that there are more people in those cars more of the time. And so, and as I'm saying all this stuff, think about what this is going to apply to aircraft in the future. People, at the end, we're only going to see people give up their car, their privately owned vehicles if we can get both those pieces in place. And so, as we get density and as we get the network to start providing these benefits and driving costs down, we actually get these other sort of synergistic effects as well, or kind of like emergent effects. An Uber pool, which has been sitting on the screen for the last minute and I haven't said anything about it, is one of those manifestations. We thought carpooling. We were skittish about carpooling pretty much like everybody because it's been talked about by policymakers for years, and it's actually started in World War II and really has never taken off. Even during the 1970s oil crisis, there was another big push to doing carpooling, but it really only got to about like 9% of commute trips, which is actually not very impressive. And so the idea really never took off. It's just too hard to make it happen until the Uber model came along, the ride-sharing model. And so we had a kind of a breakthrough a few years ago. It was actually right when I started, which is just correlational, I assure you, where we noticed that if you looked at our data, our pickup data, our drop-off data, people were getting picked up very, very close in time and location and being dropped off very close in time and location a large percentage of the time. And we're like, actually, we can just combine these rides. It'd be very easy for us to productize this and actually develop and deliver a product, which became Uber Pool. And so we sort of like sat around trying to figure out whether people would want it. We're like, carpooling's never really taken off. Are people going to actually like to share a car with a stranger? How much are they willing to pay? How does that trade off for sort of giving up their privacy? And so we ran surveys and we asked all of our friends and whatever, and and we were like, I'm not sure. And then we realized, Uber style is just launch it and find out. Let's just go get the answer. So we did, and the answer was a resounding yes. Sharing isn't the issue at all. It's price and convenience that matter. This actually shows. This is kind of a really interesting graph. It shows or kind of a visualization. It shows. A macro effect of Uber Pool in San Francisco. That on the left side, it's if these trips were done separately, what the sort of congestion situation would look like, and what it looks like with Uber Pool on the right side. So it actually has a macro impact on the congestion in the city. And right now in San Francisco, 50% of our trips are pool trips. So literally half the trips that are being consummated on the Uber network in San Francisco are our pool, which means more than one person is riding in that same vehicle. And if you look at all of our pool cities across the world, 20% of all trips are they're obviously not like our San Francisco offering is the newest or the earliest one, so it's been around, it's gotten to maturity. But all the other Uber pool cities combined, 20% of all trips are pool, which is really exciting. And if you look at just the first 7 months of 2016, some of the impacts that have happened, we've reduced the miles driven by 312 million miles, like a shocking statistic. I wanted to put that in space terms, and so it turns out that's farther than the distance from Earth to Mars. And that's when Mars and Earth are at aphelion and opposite ends of the sides of the sun. So like the worst case scenario in distance, like you'd never actually try to fly to Mars under those conditions. So we've reduced the miles driven on the road by that many. Crazy. We reduced CO2 emissions by 55,560 metric tons, and we've saved 6.2 million gallons of fuel, which would fill apparently 9 Olympic swimming pools. It's kind of gross to think about. Those are shocking statistics, and this is still very new, very early days, because ride sharing itself is only a small percentage of overall trips that are consummated today. So I mentioned earlier that attitudes about car ownership are beginning to change. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and unlike me, she didn't really care about getting her driver's license. She kind of begrudgingly got it, and she's like, "Oh, fine, I'll drive." And I was like so desperate to drive. I actually started driving before I had my driver's license, and yeah. And so, people when I was, turning 16 years old, it was like a big deal. It was like a coming of age moment to get your car and get your license and like bolt. And you're always looking for reasons to just go somewhere. And my daughter doesn't care. And what we're finding is that when we poll millennials, they say that they're not just saying they don't care. They're actually either not going to be buying another car or not going to buy a car, or they've already given it up. That's 10%. That's an amazing number. And that's, again, early days. This is we're only 4% of trips today, of consumer ground transportation. So if you have a child or niece or nephew under 10 years old today, what do you think the chances are they're gonna run to get their driver's license? Well, it's gonna be on the order of like 10%. 10% are gonna be excited about that, which is really, really cool. So we're dispensing with a personal car. Ride sharing is getting easier as the price of ride sharing falls, so we're getting more and more people to adopt it. I mentioned that getting to scale creates a density, enables a network to operate ultra efficiently, driving costs down. So what's the next big step in driving costs down? You can probably guess by looking at this video that it's self-driving. So self-driving is a big. It actually has a bunch of benefits. One of the biggies is it's going to make the cost take another big step down. It's sort of an order of magnitude savings in the cost, which we can pass on to riders, which means that the accessibility of urban mobility of this transportation method just radically accelerates, which of course increases density, which sort of feeds back on itself, is exciting. It also promises to be much safer. A big chunk, like 95% of all car accidents are because of human error. A lot of that is distracted driving. There's drunk driving. There's all kinds of other issues, and there are obviously challenges in getting software to be able to navigate the real world roadway system. But in the end, we're going to end up with a system that is with cars that are not distracted and they're not drunk, and they are very, very focused and calculating thousands of times per second the best solution to the current situation they're facing. So very, very bullish on self-driving. And really, in terms of when self-driving will be ushered in, it comes down to the technology, which we're working hard on. In fact, I launched the self-driving initiative at Uber, sort of with the realization that we needed to get going on it right away because that technology is coming really fast, and we have a chance to usher it in or be disrupted by it. So the technology is going to be a limiter, and then there's also kind of like attitudes of government and whether it gets like kind of regulated into a very slow deployment or it gets kind of like embraced. So far, it's been pretty good. And it's been embraced pretty aggressively, and people are excited for it. I think everybody sees the benefits. And so this is coming, and this is the next big step in terms of evolving the network and getting to the point where it's accessible to more people. And it's actually interesting. This is a very bold study. I couldn't believe the numbers, but it was a really well-done study by the OECD, which is part of the International Transport Forum. They found that we could, with a ride-sharing network consisting of self-driving cars, we could reduce the number of cars on the road by 90% or more. If you think about what a city would be like if you literally took 9 out of 10 cars off the road, that's kind of astounding. That's a very, very different city, and getting around is actually trivial. So that's, whether we accomplish levels like that, it's a very exciting kind of like beacon out there, or sort of possibility. So we just need, from my perspective, we just need to get people, we need to focus on getting rid of individual car ownership and getting people to leave their cars behind sooner rather than later. The crazy thing, as I've mentioned a few times now, we're only at the very early days. We're just getting started. This is a forecast by J.P. Morgan that shows what the expected penetration of ride-sharing will be. 4% of the miles driven globally today, and looking like about 25% by 2030. That's a very exciting statistic, and these are the kinds of things that are going to have very, very significant macro effects on cities, given all the stuff I've just told you about what happens when you do ride-sharing instead of individual car ownership. So we have a better future coming. People are sharing rides. They're taking public transit. That combination is a very powerful one. People have equal access to affordable transportation. That's a benefit of this model. People spend less time, stuck behind their wheel. I mean, it's ride sharing even without, self-driving vehicles and so forth. Already give people their time back in terms of not requiring them to use their mental faculties to operate a vehicle. So you can be sitting in the car and you can be working on something, besides, not concentrating on driving and stressing out about your terrible traffic situation. We're getting rid of parking spaces. Parking's going to go away, and we're going to end up having a lot of that space reclaimed. So that's really our vision for the future, is transforming cities in this way. And we know that mass urbanization is a thing that's coming. It's a trend line that's very real. And we're going to see the populations of cities radically increase. If we don't do something along these lines, we're going to have cities that are going to basically become unusable. It's going to be impossible to get around. And if you visit some of the most populated cities in the world today, spend time in Beijing, for example, it's very, very hard to get around. And it really limits what you do and the kind of value you can extract from a city. So that's the vision we have and why we're so excited about what we're working on. But even with all of that going on, we are not satisfied. And I'm like the chief not satisfied officer of Uber. What I like to do is be unsatisfied all the time and focus on, what does our mission imply? How far can we take this? Where can we go? And so we're doing what we like to call big, bold bets. We have a set of values for Uber, cultural values, and one of them is big, bold bets. And the way we describe that is, if you're not planting the seeds for 5 to 10 years out, you have no company in 5 to 10 years. I deeply believe that. So that's what we're doing. That's what this gathering is about. We are planting seeds for the 5 to 10 years out, although we're going to get started sooner than that. And in that context, it's very natural for Uber to turn its eyes to the air, such that we push a button and get a flight. Imagine, like, one day you just go to get your your regular everyday Uber, as I'm sure all of you take Uber to work every single day, and you pop open the app and you see a new option, which is Uber Air. And you realize your commute is going to look a lot different that day. You literally push a button and you get a flight. And you're going to go, this is an example of San Jose to San Francisco. That's a trip that can take anywhere from 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours, depending on traffic. And this is like a 15-minute flight. And that's assuming certain things about the vehicle and the vehicle speed. We can do better than that. But that's a radical change. That's getting people out from behind transportation at all. Like, whether you're behind the wheel or not, you're still stuck in a vehicle if you're sitting in traffic for 1.5 hours, and that constrains what you can do. This is giving you freedom, radically reducing time from point A to point B. So in big, bold bet style, we said to ourselves, like, why can't we do this today? Why can't we just start flying around cities? What if we did it with helicopters? As we feel like urban flight, which is kind of a weird term, I should call it urban aviation, can come to replace long-distance commutes. And I think it does start with long-distance commutes. This example I gave of this example is showing of San Jose to San Francisco is a really, really good initial use case. Although I believe over time, what will happen is the distances flown will actually shrink. What will happen is, as we develop vertiports and density in cities, we'll start to have people flying across cities as well. You won't do a 2-block trip you probably wouldn't do that in an Uber, in a car, but you're certainly not going to do it in an aircraft, because it's an irrational use of, you have to go up and then down immediately. It's not a good use of time. But if you're going across San Francisco, that trip, for example, can take 20, 30 minutes, more sometimes. And if you can get on an aircraft and do that in 2 or 3 minutes, that's amazing. It really will change the way people use their city and the way people move around. And so that's our belief. And tens of thousands of people are doing this one trip every single day, and they're wasting insane amounts of time in their car. Imagine how this thing replicates across the world. How many of these use cases there are? All of you, I'm sure, have a commute use case that you know about that's painful. You sit in traffic and you're like, oh God, there's got to be a better way. And the thing is, we think we can actually do this quite cheaply. We think we can start this for the cost of UberX. roughly the cost of UberX, and we think it'll get below the cost of car ownership, the variable cost of car ownership, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So our approach on this, as I mentioned when I first started talking, was to take a first principles look at the problem. To say, okay, I start asking a lot of questions and go to the physics, go to the metals, try to figure out what's really going on here. Why can't, what's preventing us from doing flight? And our white paper was the kind of the manifestation of our thought process. We just started writing things down, and we pretty soon realized that, like, hey, this is actually a narrative about how you actually do this, and this could be done sooner rather than later. And what we did was, as we started looking at it, we're like, okay, let's start with the question of why a helicopter won't work. And then the helicopter became kind of our foil, not to beat up on helicopters, because helicopters are awesome, but it became a foil for, because we know, the other thing we looked at is, like, why not in San Francisco? What would it take to fly helicopters around San Francisco? And what we found is that the community has just rejected helicopters because of noise. We found that the efficiency of helicopters, both in terms of operating costs and the sort of the fuel usage and the way they move through the air, so therefore kind of energy usage overall, these are big problems with being able to deliver a cost-effective service. In fact, the big issues turn out to be noise. You have this single large rotor that's rotating at a speed such that you're getting a ton of noise off the rotor, off the tip, because of the tip speed. The speed being fundamentally limited. You just can't really go over a certain speed with a helicopter because of the way that the propulsion works. You've got the rotor has to spin at something like 400 miles per hour. If you start spinning it much faster than that, if you think about if you're flying a helicopter at 150 miles an hour and you've got a rotor going at 400 miles an hour, that means that on the advancing side of the advancing blade, you've got a 550 mile an hour relative speed, which means that you're approaching the speed of sound. And if you hit the speed of sound every time the thing goes around, it's probably going to be a really big problem with noise. But the problem is if you slow the disc down, if you slow that rotor down, you get too low lift on the retreating side of the blade, and so you have to fly them slower. So you've got this really interesting speed envelope with helicopters. You're very limited, and there've been some crazy kind of hybrid designs with like a small fixed wings and things that have gotten helicopters to fly faster. But these are not the things you're going to deploy in a city to fly people around to work and stuff. And so that's a huge issue. And then efficiency, using combustion engines is a problem because they're only 23% efficient. If you go to an electric motor, you're getting up near 92% efficiency. So you get this sort of 3x overall efficiency with energy usage, and that's a big deal. And in fact, if you go to a fixed wing design with electric, you get a 10x improvement over a helicopter in terms of efficiency. You have emissions problems. So if you're using fossil fuels, you're emitting tons of CO2 and crap into the air, and that's obviously not something that cities are excited about deploying at scale. Cities or their denizens. And then the cost, the operating cost, for all the reasons I talked about. Also because of single points of failure. You have helicopters have single points of failure, and you just need to maintain them extremely carefully and closely, and do kind of teardowns at a very high frequency in order to maintain those aircraft, and that translates into high operating costs. And so these were all problems we realized, and we said, okay, so how do we solve that? And what we found was distributed electric propulsion solves a lot of problems. It's not necessarily a panacea, but it's about as close to a panacea as you can find. Of course, the devil's in the details. You have to actually build these things, and there's a lot of design work to do to make these things work. But with distributed electric propulsion, you have multiple electric motors, you have multiple controllers, you have redundant battery bus architectures, and these avoid the problems of this kind of catastrophic engine failure with propulsion system redundancy. If you do DEP plus autonomy, you get this fly-by-wire control system, which gets rid of a lot of the mechanical complexity of helicopters, and also, by the way, reduces the flight complexity, the operational complexity. So that gets into kind of like pilot training and these kinds of issues as well, which is very interesting. And over time, what we do is we'll evolve. We believe it starts piloted, evolving through optionally piloted into eventually fully autonomous. And we're setting a bar. We believe we can get to a high level of safety with these aircraft because of this redundancy that's built in. We're setting a bar of initially twice as safe as driving a car. We believe it'll get much, much safer than that over time. Happily, Uber hired recently, I'm sure you guys have all read about this, but we hired Mark Moore. He's our director of aviation engineering, and first time we've had an aviation role in the company. It was very exciting. He comes from 32 years at NASA, and he's one of the first people to envision electric VTOL on-demand transportation, and worked on it he built multiple electric flight demonstrators at NASA. So he's got incredible hands-on experience. He's a true builder and really gets it. He's been an incredible partner to many people in the room as well. Many of you know Mark. So again, combining fixed wing with DEP it gives us the opportunity to get a 10x efficiency improvement over helicopters, and this is one of the keys to getting this low operating cost, and we get 0 operational emissions to boot. I say operational emissions because it all comes down to where your electricity comes from, but we can say that when the aircraft's in the air, when it's operating, it's not emitting anything into the environment. So that gives us the opportunity to work on the sourcing problem, the energy sourcing problem. Noise-wise, we believe we can get these to blend into the background noise, and we actually, really spent time on this in the white paper, trying to really advance the standard by which people even measure noise. And we're optimistic about this. It's going to take some real engineering, though. It's not something you get for free, but the approach with DEP has a much better shot because you have a slower rotation speed on the disks, and of course, there's no combustion engine, so you're getting rid of that source of noise as well. So normally people think of flight as this kind of expensive and infrequent form of travel, and we're turning it into something that we believe will be a daily use phenomenon. It's really exciting. So what is Uber's role in this whole new ecosystem? Like, why is Uber talking about this? I just talked about urban mobility and cars, and you're like, he's not even talking about aircraft. Like, what's going on? And what's going on is that we bring. I mentioned that this is sort of a continuation of our mission. It fits very, very cleanly into our mission. It's very natural, and it solves a lot of the same problems. But one of the things we bring that is unique to the ecosystem is demand. We have the whole demand side of the market. We have over 60 million active riders every month using Uber. It's spread across, as you can read here, 73 plus countries. We write plus because it literally changes in real time. 450 cities. It's actually closer to 500. And we have also pool technology, Uber Pool technology, which is already demonstrating that we can combine trips into one vehicle. So these things are going to be very, very powerful, and it's kind of a big missing piece, I think, in the ecosystem for making this whole urban aviation thing happen. We also bring a very specific mission, so that's a very helpful piece of it as well. This is showing the Uber app kind of modified for Uber Air. It's also showing this concept of a multimodal trip. So we have a very specific mission. That leads to a very clear spec on the aircraft we need, and then we can provide all these pieces around that. We can provide the network optimization, the multimodal trips, meaning that if you are not near a vertiport and you need a car to get there, that can all be integrated and done very, very cleanly. We can get the car picks you up, takes you to the vertiport, you walk up you go up the elevator, you get on the aircraft, it immediately departs, it lands. You can maybe walk or take a car. It will know which one you're going to do to your destination. That in combination with the pool style matching allows us to get the prices down very, very low. So all of these are really, I think, important ingredients for making this happen. And another thing that we can do, Uber can do, and sort of already does, but will translate into the aviation world, is work on the ground with governments and the community. We're already doing this. We have people, ops folks, and policy folks all over the world in all of these cities that we're operating in, and we already have a relationship with all of the kind of local governments there, all the players involved in the regulatory situation there, and so we can really kind of clear the way for this to be rolled out all over the world. And I'm pretty soon I'm going to tell you about our two first cities that we're going to partner with in doing this, but we expect that number of cities to grow very rapidly once people see how this kind of all works and all fits together. So the way we think of our role is really putting our arms around the entire ecosystem, really helping the sort of the glue that makes the entire ecosystem work. It brings us together in a focused way so we can fast forward to the future. We love that phrase at Uber, fast forward to the future. It's sort of seeing the future and actually finding a way to get there as quickly as possible. And that manifests as us partnering with OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers themselves, partnering with real estate developers to actually get vertiports built out all over the world, partnering with technology developers and suppliers, for example, batteries and chargers and motors that are focused on the mission that can actually be generalized and commonized across the entire network. We'll also, I think a very important part of what we'll do is, and we'll get going on soon, is airspace management. So we're really excited about partnering with NASA on this. We've already begun those conversations. Airspace management is sort of like the equivalent of our dispatch, kind of on the ground. Doing the airspace piece, the routing, and the sort of the dispatch aspect is a technology capability that Uber brings to the table. We're already doing this at massive scale. We already have a lot of expertise in real-time, large-scale software and operations. And I mentioned partnering with NASA, the FAA, and we're going to do that to develop and test scheduling and sequencing and separation methods to ensure safe flight. And so there's a lot of experimentation to do as aircraft are being developed to kind of make sure that we've actually got a model, a sort of mechanism that will allow us to fly these things safely, because we're going to have a lot of these aircraft in the air. And if you think about it, this in combination with UAVs, with drones, small drones up to larger vehicles, is going to change the kind of the situation with regard to air traffic. And we just need a very different approach. We're very excited about UTM. And so NASA is going to be just a tremendous partner to make the vision a reality. And in fact, you're going to hear from the Associate Administrator of NASA, Dr. Jaewon Shin. He's going to be joining us on stage this afternoon, actually, to talk about what's happening from their perspective with UTM and airspace management. And the National Air Traffic Controllers Association is also a big partner for us, and we're going to hear from Executive Vice President Trish Gilbert describe their role in the process as well. So again, we're bringing together the kind of key players here, and then bringing a very specific mission to bear, so that we have a very concrete thing to focus on, and we actually can go build and go and start executing. That's very exciting, going from the notional to the concrete. So we also know that, as I mentioned, noise is going to be a thing. It's definitely going to be a challenge, and we have to drive through the vehicle designs. We have to work with communities. We have to work with vertiport designs to try to make it so that there's no more noise than kind of was there when we found. So we want to leave the city the way we found it, kind of thing. And this is the first time in civil aviation history we've been able to design, as a sort of primary design characteristic, been able to design into the vehicles noise as a target. And we're being very quantitative and very specific about that. And in fact, we're using physiologically based perception tools in order to figure out how people actually respond to the noise. We're not using kind of old-fashioned, just like how many decibels kind of thing. It's much more about how does your body, how do your ears, how does your brain react to different frequencies of sound and levels of sound and so forth, in different contexts, when there's background noise, when there's not background noise, et cetera. So we're going to be working with experts at NASA, with the Department of Transportation's Volpe Lab, Cambridge University, and folks from industry to discuss progress in this effort. Tomorrow, there's going to be 2 sessions on this. You'll be able to hear about exactly what's going on that front. And so here's some very concrete developments. There's over a dozen companies we know of right now with as many different design approaches working on eVTOL, as we like to refer to them, vehicle designs. And we're excited to announce we've actually entered into signed partnerships with several of them. And the folks listed here are among that group. And the reason we chose and worked with these specific folks is because each of these companies already has aircraft production and certification experience and is bringing unique expertise. So that each of them brings something specific that we think is very powerful to maximize the ability to rapidly develop and deliver these to market. So let's go through them one at a time. Bell Helicopter. Bell has actually been an incredible partner, it was Scott Drennan in particular. We met him early in our sort of discussions about the white paper, and he's a visionary and really embraces the same vision that we embrace. And we've had just great conversations about this. And Bell's very leaned in. They pioneered fixed wing VTOL with the V-22, which is shown there on the right. Really the only company that's ever done a fixed wing VTOL, in flying live missions. That's pretty exciting. So they actually have a ton of experience with this. And this is a non-trivial thing, as Scott and others at Bell will attest. You'll be hearing from Michael Thacker, their Executive Vice President of Technology and Innovation, later today. And you're also going to hear from Scott, their Director of Engineering Innovation. And they're going to actually do kind of a little bit of a peek into the sort of concept reveal of what they're working on their vehicle concept. Embraer, pretty much everyone in the room has probably flown an Embraer business jet, and that's because they're the largest manufacturer of regional jets worldwide. They also have a really sweet business jet, and the Phenom 300. I'm not speaking from ownership experience, but I hear good things. And their experience is really, really valuable because what they have done is operated at sort of commercial airliner scale. They know how to do utilization and productivity at that scale, and that's going to be super critical. That's not we're talking about volumes of production that go way beyond what aviation's really ever done. And so the number of vehicles that will be produced every year and doing that in a way that's consistent, reliable, is safe is going to require expertise. And these guys bring a lot of that to the table. The CEO, Paulo Cesar de Souza e Silva, and I hope I got that right. That's a mouthful. I think I nailed it. We'll be sharing the knowledge that they bring, and then later in the developers panel, Antonio Campello is going to provide more details on how Embraer studies an eVTOL concept, incorporate this affordable fly-by-wire technologies to achieve a high safety standard. So really excited about Embraer. And this clicker. Okay, so Aurora. Aurora's done some truly incredible things. I mean, they're an amazing airframe technology development company. They currently have an $89 million DARPA contract implementing distributed electric propulsion on a 12,000-pound X-plane. That's pretty awesome, and that's actually beyond the kind of needs of kind of an Elevate-style aircraft. They've really pioneered autonomy. So on the right there is a Centaur DA-42, and that's an optionally piloted aircraft. They've used that to achieve an evolutionary path towards certified autonomous operation. That's really exciting because getting to autonomy certified is going to be tricky. And in fact, we think that the best path, probably the only path that makes sense, is to start with the Elevate vehicles piloted. Basically try to get to the point where the pilots don't require the same amount of training as like a helicopter pilot because of the ease of operation compared with operating a helicopter, and then ultimately go to full autonomy. These guys are charting the way right now, which is really exciting. The CEO of Aurora, John Langford, is going to share how they've developed and flown many VTOL flight demonstrators, and each time doing this as part of a rapid development program. So really, really fun to hear from John later today. And then Pipistrel. This is the Alpha Electro and the Pantera. They're two of their vehicles. Pipistrel is a smaller general aviation aircraft manufacturer, but in spite of that, they are the first ever to produce electric aircraft. So they have deep expertise in producing electric aircraft that actually work and can fly very effective long distance missions. And they've established a very, very strong concept development team. They've just opened a huge new factory to increase their capacity, and they're actually located in Slovenia. We have to visit them, and it's gorgeous out there. So if you are looking for an amazing place to visit, I'm sure they'd invite you to come hang out at their factory. The CEO of Ivo Boscarol is going to be speaking with us to share the company vision for electric flight and our partnership, the partnership we have with them to achieve vastly higher production volume for these aircraft. And we've also gotten to know their R&D director very well, Tine Tomazik, and he's just an incredibly smart, incredibly visionary guy who's really impressed us. And he's going to be discussing the more technical aspects of their eVTOL design when he speaks. Mooney is a really another just really interesting partner. But this is the Ovation 2 and the M10 demonstrator here, and they're going to be announcing not just the partnership with us today, but another exciting one. I won't steal their thunder. I'll let them do it later on. They've been known for many years as kind of the general aviation product to buy if you want simultaneous high speed and efficiency. That sounds like it's right up our alley. We need that type of expertise, and we have the additional new constraint of batteries as an energy constraint on our designs. So, but we still want the speed. So we're going to be looking for that, for these people who just really obsess over the design to get to extremely efficient flight. And their executive vice president Thomas Manning is going to be with us to share their concept, for addressing the Elevate market later in the program. And on the city front, we're pleased to announce our first partner cities. In the U.S., we're going to start our VTOL operations right here in Dallas. And we don't want to wait 5 to 10 years. Nobody wants to wait that long. So we're gonna actually we're shooting for a deployment by 2020. And you can imagine landing at DFW Airport, like many of you did when you came here today or yesterday, and flying to Frisco or just a block away, in just a few minutes. That's an amazing. Imagine literally landing at an airport, taking like an air trainer, just walking to another aircraft, getting on and landing at your final destination in minutes. This is what we're bringing to Dallas, and Dallas is kind of the perfect place because it has this rich history of aviation. You've got American Airlines, you have Southwest Airlines, Bell Helicopters, the FAA Rotorcraft Directorate is here, and generally we find that on the government side and just the population, the citizens of Dallas and Fort Worth, there's just an incredible lean into aviation. People are very, very excited about it and about aviation aviation advancement. And I especially like to thank Dallas Mayor Rawlings. He's been just incredible, and you're going to hear from him soon, and Fort Worth Mayor Price as well for their support and hospitality through this whole thing. It was just, we really said, let's find the city in the United States that most embraces this, and I'll tell you, Dallas-Fort Worth has blown us away, so we're really, really excited to launch here. Yay, Dallas-Fort Worth. And so part of the Dallas-Fort Worth community is Hillwood. Hillwood Properties is our infrastructure partner here in Dallas. And they are one of the top 10 real estate developers in the world. The chairman of Hillwood is Ross Perot Jr., and he's the first guy to circumnavigate the world in a helicopter, and I'm sure many of us have done it since, but that's kind of a thing. I asked him if he just made a bunch of sandwiches and jumped in the helicopter. He's like, it was a little more complicated than that. And so what they're going to be doing is developing vertiports and developing for the Uber network. And we've already chosen using our Uber data and working closely with the team there 4 vertiport locations in the DFW area, including Hillwood's Frisco station. And we expect to start that development project the next year. So we're going to get going on that very, very quickly. Ross Perot Jr. is actually going to be speaking today. I think he's maybe right after me, actually. And just thank him for making the time to come out and be with us today. And he's very passionate about this vision, as are we. And then outside the U.S., so we've spent some time in Dubai lately, and Dubai has a government that's just been extremely forward-leaning toward technology in the future generally. They're a great partner for this, and they're really the first city in the world to embrace the concept of urban aviation. Earlier this year, they were talking about this openly. Dubai's layout also lends itself incredibly well to VTOL operations, as this route here is from the Al Maktoum International Airport to the Jumeirah Beach residence, and it's just one example of many, but it would be a fantastic kind of route and one of the first for sure. And we're excited to announce with Dubai, God, that picture's amazing. We're now excited to announce with Dubai that we've entered into a relationship, a partnership with the Dubai Road and Transport Authority. And what we're doing with them is they're going to be funding studies for demand modeling so that we can deeply understand pricing and network optimization in the Dubai area. And we're going to hear in the program from Steer Davies Gleave, the firm we've hired to actually do this study, as well as our own Elevate data science team. We're working together on this, and they're going to tell us more about the expertise we're developing in Dubai. And we really like to thank Minister Gergawi and representatives from the RTA. They've just been continually supportive of what we're doing, the commitment to the project. And we're really especially thankful to His Excellency, the Sheikh Mohammed, for his outstanding leadership in making Dubai the city of the future. It's really impressive. And as I mentioned, none of this is 5 to 10 years out. And in fact, this is about World Expo 2020 that's happening in Dubai. What we're shooting to do is have at least a working prototype, but even better yet, conduct passenger flights as part of World Expo 2020 in Dubai. The expo themes are opportunity, mobility, and sustainability. So it's a pretty strong overlap with what we're trying to do here. And so we're really excited to be working with the Expo 2020 team over there to integrate innovative flight technology into their plans. And we're not ready to announce it yet, but we are collaborating with some of the premier real estate developers in Dubai, and we'll have more announcements on that coming up in the next few weeks. That's in same sort of model as we talked about with Hillwood in terms of building out vertiports all over the Dubai area and then the Middle East. And so, of course, because VTOLs are all electric, we need to rethinking about charging batteries. And this is a particularly important thing to nail from the perspective of operational efficiency. We can't have the VTOLs landing on vertiports and sitting there for an hour charging. They've got to be able to top up their batteries and get back up in the air very, very quickly to achieve the throughput capabilities that we are looking for. And so we've partnered with ChargePoint, and ChargePoint has 70% of the North American public and private automobile electric charging market today. So they're a pretty dang good partner from that perspective. They know how to do scale. They're also just technically extremely deep and are very excited and see a path to being able to do very, very rapid charging of batteries. We're going to be developing an exclusive charger for the Uber network, the Uber eVTOL network. And my team has spent a bunch of time with the CEO, Pat Romano, and his team, and he's going to be speaking, they're going to be speaking later today and tomorrow. And honestly, we couldn't be more super pumped to be partnering with these guys. They deeply get it. So the race is on. It's a sprint in Dallas and Dubai to get to scale, which is pretty exciting. We have 2 cities running in parallel, and we're just going to see how fast we can run and how fast we can make this a reality. And when we do, we see the opportunity to build this robust multi-port network I talked about in the city. And we're seeing our models are telling us that we'll be able to get on the order of 200,000 trips per day happening in aircraft in these cities. That's an amazing. That's a material impact to moving people around in a city, and doing it in a way that's just is like a fantasy. It's like you're up over the top of your city. It's a dream to be flying over your city. So this is just like I'm getting a little overexcited maybe if you can't tell. So our modeling has told us that this is all very, very doable, and we're trying to be conservative. Who knows though? It's modeling, so things can always go awry. As excited, this is. What I hope to do here is get you to feel the excitement that I feel. I think you guys, this group in particular, already probably walked in the door with that. But this sort of concretizes it a bit. And what I really wanted to show you was these kind of very specific moves that are being made to unlock this and to fast forward to the future as quickly as possible. So with that, thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of the summit. Clicker? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Great. So I believe we're now breaking for lunch. We're serving lunch in 2 areas, one on the left, one on the right. Please be back here 5 till noon. Ross Perot Jr. will be joining us at noon sharp. Thank you.